We are starting indeed. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for dropping by and joining me on the official DAS channel. It is wonderful to see you all. And I hope I can have a wonderful, chilled out time with you as we talk about things that are exciting and dear to us, which is, of course, DAS Studio as well as dForce. It is wonderful to spend some time with you. I've been missing you, and I hope you've been very much enjoying the subway animation that we got started about a month ago on this very stream. It's been a lot of work. I've spent about 2 weeks putting all the finishing touches on there, and about 5 or 6 animatics later, I was still not quite happy. And this is what I've come up with so far. And there've been several tests on this, so now it's kind of cool. DAS Daddy, that is just thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yes, dForce is the topic. And I thought, because we all know a little bit about dForce, I'll just start from the very beginning and show you a few bits and pieces, maybe tips and tricks that you didn't know, how to freeze your dForce morphs or turn them into morphs, and how to freeze animations in your scene, how to simulate more, how to simulate less, how to simulate in different passes, how to use the dForce wind node, and just regularly how to use dForce clothing that you've bought from the store. With your own scenes to add a little bit more realism to it. If you want to catch up on previous live streams, there is in fact a place that has been added to the DAS website, and I just thought I'm going to show you that. It's here at the very top of the das3d.com website, and it's right here under community. There is in the studio, and this is the landing page. If you go there, then you'll see kind of the latest promo image here, and if you scroll down, you'll see the latest bundle that might go with it, what the next live stream is all about, and you can catch up on past live stream over here. There's a little bit about me in case you don't know who I am. I'm Jay, by the way, nice to meet you. And on the bottom here, there's going to be a library that Travis and his team have built so that you can catch up easily on previous live streams. Because we're serious about this, we'd like to build this up as a community platform that we can all get to hang out with one another, share tips and tricks, and just generally have a good time with one another. That is the spirit, really. Let's jump right in. Oh yes, also then the Diana animation, just quickly, while we saw it in the beginning, that is something I've only thrown together literally this week within about a couple of hours, so one of those things. Wind needs turbulence, Linus, that is absolutely right. Yes, absolutely, AstroCat. We're not going to delete them, and YouTube is probably the way to go there because YouTube's really good at flagging these things up. I'm also adding chapter points right after the session. If you want to jump into a particular point in the session, then you can go and jump there straight away. You don't have to watch the full 2 hours again. But it's wonderful to newcomers as well as seasoned pros alike to jump right in and get started with it. So dForce then. Let's talk about dForce. dForce is currently a clothing simulation engine, but I believe the team are working on, in the future, with an eye on expanding this into other bits and pieces. So not just having it be a clothing simulation engine, they want to turn this into something much larger. So we'll see what else is coming. Maybe other types of physics, maybe soft body animation, maybe water animation, we don't know. But it is certainly kind of an umbrella term of something that isn't just going to be in the future for cloth animation. Currently it is, but maybe in the future we'll see other additions to that. So let's refer to dForce not just so much as the cloth engine, but generally as the DAS Studio integrated physics engine. And the first part into this journey is in fact the cloth animation. Let me show you the pertinent parts in DAS Studio so that you know where to look for dForce options. My interface might look different to yours. I suggest if yours doesn't look like this or anywhere near like this, have a look up here and switch it to the City Limits Light one. I'm saying this because that is probably the one that has most of the tabs exposed already, probably more than I'm using. But there's a video on my personal channel in which I'm creating this exact setup. So if you want to follow along there, Brian, if you can figure out that link that's on my channel, it's the one about the UX in DAS Studio. So dark side is that's the physical look, but the way that palettes are distributed, that is very close to the City Limits Light. So I've got my own bits and pieces here. If you start with this one, you're very close to what I have here, with more buttons and more panels. So I've switched some off, and I've added some around. The two most important ones, well, it's kind of the three most important ones that we deal with. The first one is the simulation settings pane, and I've got it docked over here. It looks very similar. If you want to compare it to the render settings tab, it has a big blue button at the top right that says simulate. Dock it wherever you like, but that's what you need. If you don't have that floating around, you can get that from window, panes, and then there is simulation settings. You can also add it by right-clicking on any of these empty parts and just say add pane and pick the simulation settings from here, and that'll just dock that pane right there. So that's one that we're going to talk about. You're also going to probably want to have the surfaces tab open. I have it here. It doesn't look very exciting at the moment because I don't have any objects in my scene selected, so I don't see any surface properties. The surfaces, you're probably familiar with them for, well, this is how my object looks. This is how the transparency is applied, what materials applied, what shader is applied to what material zone. That's kind of what the surfaces tab is there for. But it also plays an important role in dForce because the properties per material zone on an object in regards to telling the dForce engine how an object needs to behave or what part of an object needs to behave, those are surface properties. So that is where they can be found. And then the third one, last but not least type thing, is the parameters tab. But that is kind of my go-to favorite because it just comprises of all the parameters for any part of our object. So we're going to need those three things. And rather than starting with an item of clothing, I'm going to start with something completely different. I'm going to just give you the grand tour of dForce before we move on to posing characters with items that you bought, probably from the Jada bundle. I'm going to start with the primitive, with several primitives actually. Let's go and start with a plane. Let's make that 5 meters and make that not have any divisions at all, just one division. And that's going to be our ground. That's the first thing we're going to do. That wasn't right. That was totally not what I wanted to do. Let's go do this again. Create new primitive, and I wanted the primary axis to be y positive. That means the plane's going to lie on the floor like this, and I'm going to switch on my filament viewport as well, just because I do like filament and it gives me a much better representation of what the object's going to look like. It's a bit bright for me right now, so that's just my plane object, which I might go and rename into ground. And I'll go and give that a different color, perhaps something, maybe not exactly black, but something like a dark gray, something like that. And perhaps also give that a little bit of less of a glossy effect here. So it's very, very shiny. I'd rather my ground isn't that shiny. And that is all happening on the surfaces tab. So this is kind of how you adjust surface property. So under glossy, I would say it's not glossy, is it? It's under, where is it? Glossy roughness. There we go. Let's crank up the roughness, and that makes it less shiny. Something like that. That's just our ground. And now let's go and put an object in here. I'm doing this just to show you how dForce thinks about these things. Everything that's in here, 0.3, divisions don't matter. This is going to be a tiny sphere here. In fact, maybe let's make it a bit bigger. Whoops. Let's bring a larger sphere in, maybe like a 0.5. There we go. Also give that a little color. And, color is just so that we can see it better in the stream. There we go. I don't mind if it's glossy or not. The way dForce thinks about things that you bring in, they're all colliders by default. So even if you don't have any dForce objects in the scene, which we don't at the moment, everything acts as a collider. So if something is dForce, anything that's visible in your scene will act as a collider. That is, I'm just going to leave it as sphere, and I'm going to create a third one. That's also going to be a plane. This one's going to be a bit smaller, maybe 2 meters, and I'm going to give that lots of divisions. And the divisions are important for anything that has dForce on it. So anything that you simulate, the more geometry it has, the better it can be bent in places. So if you have a flat plane like the ground plane with only one division, That's essentially just one polygon. That won't be able to simulate because the dForce engine, or basically no 3D editor, would know where to bend it. But 100 divisions, that's like 10 by 10. That's, you know, that should be kind of large enough. I'll add that here and call that my cloth. And we'll go and bring that up and move it over and above our little sphere. Something like that. We're also going to give it a little color. Maybe like a dark green, like this one maybe. There we go. That could be okay. That's fine. Is it? I don't like the green. I like a different green. Let's make it this green. This is much better. So that is essentially all I need for my starting project. But notice that none of these things have currently got dForce properties. So if I go into my simulation settings now and hit that big blue button that says simulate, nothing's going to happen. Or I mean, dForce is going to try it, but it'll throw up an error message that says, hey, I haven't found anything that has dForce properties. So to be honest, I don't really know what to do with them. So the way to get around it and keep a particular eye here with our cloth selected on the properties in the surfaces tab here is we need to add a dForce property to an object if you want to make it dForce capable. And that is in fact what every clothing creator out there does who sells dForce capable clothing. They add this to their clothing and then they tweak parameters and make sure when you do hit that button, it just works. But you know, by default, it doesn't. So we need to tell DAZ Studio, hey, we need to turn at least one of these objects into a bendable cloth type thing. And the way you do this is under the simulation settings tab right here. It has this tiny little context menu, I believe hamburger icon is what I call it. When you click on that, you have this thing that's called dForce, and then you have these three choices at the top here: static surface, dynamic surface, and dynamic surface add-on. If you pick the middle one here, it'll add everything that you need to it. And it does this by adding one extra slot into the surfaces tab. So if I do this, watch what happens on the left-hand side. This thing collapses first of all, but we have, in addition to where this list ended here under geometry, we now also have simulation and a lot of properties here. And I'll talk about these in a second. Just the first one that I want to introduce you to is in fact A, that it's there, and B, that there's this thing here at the very top which is called visible in simulation. So if you switch that off, then everything disappears in the simulation tab. And that is as if this surface is not, or this material zone is not being simulated at all. But if you switch it to on, then it will, and it'll participate in this in the simulation. So for clothing, this is important to understand because an item of clothing could potentially be made up of multiple material zones, and some of them could be switched off. So if you have something like a dress and the top is conforming on the dress and the bottom is in fact dForce, but the top doesn't want to be dForce, then it could be that the simulation properties on the top part of the dress are just switched off. That's possible. So there we go. That is that. And this is really all we need to have in place for the simulation to begin. So with literally the default values, if you now hit simulate, watch what happens. dForce is going to go to work, and as I said, treat everything in the scene as a colliding object except for the one thing, or the things that have dynamic surface properties attached, and it will drape the cloth over the ball, which is awesome. Nothing else has changed, and there doesn't seem to be much that I can influence on this, but it looks pretty neat. I can't really go back on this. All I can do is, if I'm not happy with this, if I wanted to change something else, maybe bring the cloth to a higher position, I can go ahead in the simulations pane here and hit clear. And if I do that, then my cloth will spring back into the previous position. Let's do that and go. It just goes back to the top. I could go and change it and drape it again, maybe from a lower or from a higher height. I can change its position if I want, and then go and hit simulate. I'm telling you this because this is something in the simulation process that you're going to have to do over and over again until you come up with the desired result. But there's many more things and tips and tricks that we can use in order to, in order to turn this into what we wanted it to look. So right now it looks like I've just draped a piece of cloth over an object. So if I were to move, which sadly Julia and I am, that's a whole other topic here, but we're going to have to move. Sadly, we don't have another house. But if you may have seen that people who have a house and then they go in America and then they go to Australia for 6 months, they put cloth over all their bits and pieces, like over the couch and over the pictures and everything. This is what that looks like. So you can totally do that and build yourself that exciting kind of draped over house that is abandoned and it all looks creepy. I can actually, once this is draped, I can still move this object. So I can now go and change its position if you want to do that. You can even go and take this guy away here, and the cloth is going to remain in that position if you save your scene. However, if you hit the simulation button again, it'll just go and re-simulate everything. So we probably don't want to do that. I'll bring it down with Control Z. So if you ever find you have that ideal drape, you might want to go over to the Parameters tab, especially if you have multiple items that all have dForce on it and you want to simulate them in sequence. This one first, then make sure that's happy, then simulate another one. You can go over to the Parameters tab, and under Simulation, you have this button here. That's an important one. This is on the Parameters tab under Freeze Simulation. So if you click that and the freezing is on this item, this is per item, then you could re-simulate, and and other items in the scene would still be simulated, but not this one. It'll fall back into this position, but it won't be re-simulated. So that's important if you've got something that you're kind of happy with. That's number one that you can do. Number two, and I thought I'm going to explain this right away, in case you have something that is really dear to you and you say, hey, I've simulated it, it took me a long time and I'm really, really happy with what I've done. You can go and save the shape of this object out and import it again as a morph. I'll just go show you that quickly before we move on, because yes, Kitty House, I'm going to totally explain that. You can simulate longer, shorter, and you can stop the simulation in the middle. So maybe we'll do that actually before I show you how to export this and import it again as a morph. Because Kitty House 4 makes a very good point. There's really nothing that we can do here. What do I do if 30 frames the simulation wasn't long enough? Maybe I wanted to simulate this item over a longer period of time. Maybe I want to have it simulate so that it just about falls onto the figure and not follow all the way through. What do we do then? There is a way to do this, and in fact, let me go and clear the simulation. Also switch the freezing off here and show you where that is. So this tab here, the simulation settings tab, has a lot of options. The first one here is environment, that determines the gravity and air resistance. Gravity of 1 is gravity on Earth. Gravity of 0 would be nothing falls. It's all simulating, but nothing falls down. Gravity of -1 is things fall up instead of down. And anything in between is, Moon's gravity, Mars gravity, really heavy planets and all that. But then slightly further at the bottom here, under duration, you have exactly the thing that we're talking about. Currently, we're simulating the current frame, and it'll do that over a course of 30 frames. But if you take this drop down and turn it down and use either the animated timeline play range or an animated custom play range, then you'll be able to park the animation wherever you wanted it to be. So let me use my timeline play range. And this is now going to have a slightly different effect because it depends on how many frames are set in my timeline. It happens to be, if I open this up, by default, it's set to 30 frames. So if I go and do nothing else and just change this over to animated play range and simulate again, then you can see that my playhead will go through this simulation, and it's now at the end. It's no longer at the beginning. It hasn't set any keyframes, but dForce has memorized what happens on which frame. So you can now go and take your playhead and bring it back and turn it to wherever you need the simulation to be. This is a much better intro into what I'm going to show you in a moment. Because the other thing that you might find is, hey, 30 frames might not have been enough to simulate my object. Maybe I needed 60, maybe I need 90, maybe I have a long animation, there might be wind blowing and the wind blows for 5 seconds. 30 frames isn't going to be enough for that. So what we can do is we can turn my play range here to something much larger. So let's turn this to maybe like 91 frames. This is more than 30, 3 times more in fact. And it now means that since my dForce simulation settings are still set to use the play range here, it will now go and simulate 90 frames. We're not going to see that big a difference, but we certainly do see something is happening beyond frame 30. It's coming to a rest now, so it's not really a great example. So 60 frames is probably enough for most still frame users, but if you're talking about animation, then you probably need to have a much larger way, and we'll look into that as well when we look at the wind node, which is very, very exciting. It's kind of cool if you wanted to animate a waving flag, and I think that was the case on the Season Pass 2 with the pirates. I think somebody made it, Travis's team has made an animated banner at the top where the pirate flag with the DAS logo is waving in the wind, and that was done with dForce. We'll talk about gravity in a moment. But just for now, the one thing is that if you find yourself, hey, at frame 20 was the ideal simulation that I want to keep, and I want to make sure I don't lose it, and maybe I need my play range for something else, and I have 3 other objects that need to be dForced, and what do? You can go and export the shape of this object and turn it into a morph, and that'll be really useful. Some of you may know how to do this already, but if you don't, let me quickly explain it to you. You need to export this frame and only this object at that frame at this resolution and nothing else, just out to something like a temporary folder. Make sure you disable or just make invisible all other objects that might be in your scene. So my ground and my sphere, I don't want to export that. It's just the cloth. And I'll head over to File, Export, and I'll just put this on my desktop, maybe in a new folder that I will call, if ever the new folder shows up, waits patiently for it to happen. It did actually, Todd. Yes, absolutely. The mouse is the 3D Universe mouse that I have animated. There's the mouse and there's also the crab. I've animated both of them. Why did this take so long? Don't know. Stream. Well, let's dForce stream. How's that? dForce stream. Yes, I've animated those in DAS Studio. I hope you like it. I'll just call this one maybe cloth drape. I'll just call it cloth drape. That's cool. I'll export that just with the DAS Studio preset here and hit accept. That is that. I can go back to the beginning. In fact, I can go to my simulation properties and literally clear this whole simulation because I don't really need it anymore. I can go and make my ground and my sphere visible again if I wish. But the most important thing is I can now bring this as a morph into my object. And the way to do that is under Edit, Object, Morph Loader Pro. Hit that and that'll open a secret special dialog. Thank you, Brian, for posting that. That's very cool. And then you go and pick the file that you've just saved out. This was my dForce stream here. Cloth drape. Hello? There we go. I don't know why my computer's a bit slow today. It kind of depends if you have reverse deformations or not. Let's just say we have them. And hit accept, and it should say created morph successfully, which, you know, that's lucky for us, it worked. It usually should work when you have the correct resolution set there. So under morphs, I find my cloth drape now, and it will now act as the simulation did, just with a slider. So that will now be saved with your scene. You can also save this out as a figure or prop asset, and it will have that exact morph in it. It'll also have a reverse morph because that's just the settings on the slider. This is what happens when we go the negative way, so kind of cool what you can do there. But you can also change that on the little gear icon under parameter settings. You can rename it, you can put it somewhere else, you can take the minimum out if you want. And now we have something like this. So this is a way to make sure when you simulate other objects, if you want to save something as a morph, save a simulation out that you want to present to use in other scenes or present to your customers, this is how you can do it. It is not new, Trevor. It's been there for a while. It's part of the content creation suite of tools, basically. But it's not something that, like, ordinary users like you and me, we don't really need to use it all that often. But if you're going into content creation, Morph Loader is really handy. So Morph Loader lets you apply so-called deltas, it essentially lets you, if you have an object like this, deform it in another application or inside DAZ Studio with something else, and then you bring it in. You can save the deltas as a morph slider, and it's a very nifty way of bringing geometry changes in there without delivering the actual geometry. Just in a nutshell, that is what that is. Exactly, massive damage morph, Ascania, indeed. So that's how you can save things out. But so now this my play range doesn't do anything anymore, and I can use it for other things, which is kind of nice. Let me go and dial this morph out again. It doesn't matter if it's there or not. And let's quickly play with the gravity, because that's another thing that's quite nice. So if I go gravity, currently gravity is set to 1, and I think the maximum I can set it to is 2. Unless you go to that little gear icon and make it, change the parameter settings. You could turn it into 10 or something. That's something you can do. If we go and simulate this again, perhaps 60 frames is enough. You can see that by 30 frames the thing has already dropped down. It doesn't go down further anymore. Let me go and change my play range here. You can quit the simulation if you find it's gone on long enough. You can just hit escape or hit the cancel button. That'll work. I'll make it 61 frames. Go simulate that again. And it just falls a little bit faster. So by frame 30, I think by frame 20, it had already fallen to the ground. And so likewise, then if I make this a little bit, let me clear that out. And if I make that a bit lighter here, if I make it 0.3, for example, gravity 0.3, it's like a third of the gravity of Earth. That's kind of what we have on Mars. And look what happens, it still falls, but by frame 30, it hasn't even reached the ball yet. So it's just much lighter. And that influences of what happens to your cloth. But in addition to that, and I'm just mentioning this as an aside without going into it all that much. I'll go put this back to 1 maybe. In order to change the properties of how a cloth behaves, you can head over to the Surfaces tab with your object selected under simulation, and then you can have a look at all these exciting parameters that are here. So friction is the first one under this. This is on the Surfaces tab under simulation. Either this shows you everything, which is a bit overwhelming, or you go and whittle them down into these little sub menus here. The first one here is, I've already showed you that, visible in simulation. Then the other one is friction. So you can play with that. Friction is essentially how the cloth itself behaves. So not only does it simulate, but silk simulates differently than denim jeans or leather would or linen would. And so this is how you can, there's lots of properties that you can change there, and clothing creators or content creators know more about this than I do. You can fine-tune how your cloth falls. So like a silk object would be further on the left-hand side here, that falls much, that would kind of fall more into one another, cling more to other bits and pieces, and anything towards the right direction that isn't the default would be something like more denim and leather and ski jacket material and all that kind of stuff. Alt-click on a slider to bring it back into its default position. There's tons of other options here that I'll let you explore on your own. There's collision and the structure of objects and the smoothing. So those are all properties that you can influence. And my best advice is just play with it and see how it behaves, and don't be afraid to experiment. I'm leaving everything at the default if you want to follow along. I'll show you one other exciting thing. Is imagine we had 2 things we want to simulate. It's something I was gonna explain in the beginning. Let me go and put my sphere over here and my cloth kind of over here, and I'm going to go and duplicate these things. I'm not going to make instances. These needs to be duplicates. I'll say edit duplicate node, and that's just going to be cloth 2. Well, actually cloth 2 needs to go over here. So we have cloth 1 is on the left, cloth 2 is on the right, and we'll take the sphere as well. We'll duplicate the sphere as well. And sphere 2 is also going to be on the right. And this is kind of imagine you had 2 objects that you want to use passes of, like, one needs to simulate and then the other one needs to simulate. You can freeze them. So let me go and simulate both of them. for 60 frames, just with regular gravity. Takes a tiny bit longer, but DAZ Studio should just simulate both of them until it's done. And imagine I'm happy with my left object. I can go back and forth, I don't really mind. I say on here, on this object now, cloth number 1, I'll head over to the parameters tab and say, hey, this thing is awesome. I don't want it to resimulate. I love the simulation as it is. I want DAZ Studio to not touch it if I go and change parameters. You can go on the parameters tab, under general, there's a simulation tab, and you can switch that to on. So this means now even though when I move the timeline, my object is still going to move, but the simulation itself isn't going to be resimulated. So it's kind of important to know about this if you have multiple dForce objects in your scene. So look at that. I can still move the timeline, and it looks like nothing much has changed, but you know, if it had, which it will in a moment, then the left-hand side isn't going to be affected. So let's take my second cloth, the one that hasn't changed, and let's go and move the ball above it and change the gravity of our whole simulation from 1 to -1. Maybe even -2. Maybe -1 is probably enough. And that's still 1, isn't it? I said kind of -1. That's the idea. -1, there we go. And now if I go and resimulate this thing, watch what happens. This is kind of exciting. It's my favorite thing. So it resimulates, but even though I've clearly changed the gravity, the cloth goes up on the right-hand side, my left-hand side is completely untouched. So it still behaves as in the first simulation. This is kind of nice. So yeah, lots of fun with gravity you can have there. Really spooky effects. And then especially if you go and simulate this longer, now that these things, like a tablecloth, has fallen over a table, it just kind of moves away there. That's kind of nice. Imagine that in a simulation. Very cool. The kernels, yeah. So the kernels is a good point. Renzero, it's one of those things that before dForce can start working, the first time you use it on a new graphics card, you might find that it just comes up with a little message that says, hey, dForce needs to compile your render kernels. You can, on the advanced tab, you can see which graphics card you're using. So if I switch this over to my other one, it probably needs to compile the kernels again. Even though it's the same card, it probably thinks, yes, that's a change that's happened, so we need to do that. It's between 2 and 5 minutes, and then it should just go and do the simulation. And luckily, you only have to do this once, and then your kernels are compiled, and it'll just remember that. What else? I think we've done this, we've done that. Oh yeah, let's do one other thing. While we've got one object that kind of behaves weirdly like that, let's go and crank up the total simulation time to something a little bit longer, namely 121 frames. Let's do that. And let me go, I'll leave the first bit as it is, and I'll just go and put something else in the mix that I find fascinating about dForce, and that is the wind node. So wind is something, I love wind because currently we've only simulated what happens when all that happens is that a surface just falls on up or down an object. But what if, like in reality, there'd be wind there? Then, like in video games, you'll see cloth moving as the character moves. And how can we do that? Say your character fights in a storm, so his coat needs to kind of waft around and waft away from him, or something. Or somebody shouts at someone with dForce hair, and the hair kind of flows back because the guy's got such an enormous breadth, and that we can do that as well in DAZ Studio with dForce wind node, and that is up under the create menu. If you head over here and say at the bottom, new dForce wind node, and you can have as many as you like in your scene. One usually it will suffice, and I'll go and put it right in the default settings. That'll be the middle of the scene, and here it is. And it behaves like a regular object. It's selectable in the scene. And I think I want mine perhaps to be on the right-hand side of the object and kind of blow over as the cloth falls up. I'd like to make it blow over there. The simulation on the left isn't going to be affected. So that's kind of nice. Let's go and move this over, and then I'll show you some of the things you can set on the wind node. I'll turn this around 90 degrees, kind of exactly 90 degrees. And I'll bring it up a bit. If you haven't used the wind node, it's very similar to all the other items that you can add in your scene. It's a little bit like a camera. It looks like a little fan icon here, and it has a couple of things that you can adjust. So the first thing is the diameter of it. So mine is, you can just about see that here. So it looks like a cylinder, and I think for my project, it's probably going to be big enough, but if you needed it bigger to encompass a larger area, that's also on the parameters tab, where there's now a new option, which is the wind option. So you can change the diameter. That'll make the whole thing larger. If I crank this up, this is what happens. Or you can make it smaller if you want to have a little small gust of wind there. You'll also see that there's these other circles there. So the first one, I might just make this a bit larger here. I'll turn it to 80. Find that appropriate. Actually, maybe make it 100. 100 is good. You see these two circles here, the inner circle and the outer circle. That's kind of a fall off to the outside. So the wind's going to be stronger on the inside here, then falls off until it reaches 0 on the outside. And you have another fall off that's the forward direction of the wind. So this here will have the full intensity of the wind, and then this bit here will have the wind gradually fall off until over here this wind node doesn't affect anything beyond that. And you can change that as well. You can either change the fall off itself, so fall off start, that changes basically moves the first cylinder kind of further over here. If I don't want anything to fall off, I do this. Or you can go and have the fall off length. That's the second cylinder that gets influenced. If you want the fall off to be much larger or much smaller, you can do that over here. So I might just do this. And then the most important aspect of this simulation is, of course, at the top here, which is the strength in miles per hour. Default is 5, so let's have a look what that would do. I'll just go and simulate this thing. Again, I'm expecting the cloth to fall up and then be blown over to the right, which it is, but only very subtly. So it's not as dramatic as I had hoped, but you can also see, and that's why I've changed the duration of the animation to 120 frames, that it continuously simulates. So the wind agitates the cloth continuously, which is really, really cool. So now you can see this as an animation, and that's wonderful. If you have something that just wafts in the wind, that's just fairly cool, isn't it? I do like that. I love animations. Let's change the wind strength a little bit and make it just a bit stronger into something, I don't really know what. Let's try 10. That's twice as strong as before, and see what happens. You're getting an error initializing the OpenCL kernels. That might indeed be something. What graphics card are you using? Because it's OpenCL is essentially what is used to make dForce do what it does, and it needs the OpenCL drivers to work, and sometimes they are outdated. So I might actually make this a bit stronger here. Maybe I'll try 20. Simulate this again. So it could well be related to your graphics card driver. They're usually packaged with that and might not be available on some graphics cards. But let's hope that's not the case. Let's hope it's just a driver issue. So there we go. Now my cloth is wafting in the wind, and I can go and strengthen that if I wanted to. Do you know, I've animated the wind strength accidentally. I didn't mean to do that. I put 20 at the end, and as you can see over here, as I move my timeline over, it goes and changes. So I should really do that on the beginning here and hope it doesn't interpolate anymore. There we go. Now let's go and simulate it again. So we have 20 from the get-go. Lee, exploding things in dForce. Yes, let's talk about this as well. That often happens. I'll show you some characters with clothing in a minute, and I'll make clothing explode. I'm good at that. I think we're all really good at that. But I'll also show you why that happens and how you can potentially avoid that. So I'll show you tips and tricks around that. So this is kind of cool. Imagine you render this animation out and even simulate even more frames. Then you have literally something that wafts and waves in the wind. That is just so cool, isn't it? Yeah, that is just awesome. So this is all this cool stuff that you can do with dForce. Before we get to the characters, I'll show you one last thing because it's kind of related to the wind node, and that's kind of an easy thing to try at home, and you don't need anything other than just DAZ Studio to make that happen. I mean, as if this wasn't exciting enough, you know, you can make, I'll show you how to make a waving flag, maybe not with your logo on it, I'll leave that up to you, but I'll show you how to make a waving flag that you can use for your own simulations. And if you have something like that, if you render it out, please share it on YouTube. I'd love to see it. It's just one of those things. It's just really nice to show you quick little tips and tricks and inspire you and get you excited about something that, you know, you can really sink your teeth in. So I love this already. I love it so much. Maybe I'll just go and save it. Yes, indeed. The wind node it does have its own turbulence. That's true. You don't have to set the turbulence anymore. Right. Yeah, so that's a good point. So under the hood, Linus makes a very good point. Under the hood, mathematically, all kinds of scary things are going on there. And that is, if you were to have a continuous force, then the thing would literally go and blow over and literally just remained like that and not really move. But if you had a turbulence force, there is something that changes. So wind outside isn't really a constant force, like a fan indoors with no air movement. That is kind of a constant force, but you'd need to move it around a little bit. Otherwise the cloth would never move from left to right or up or down. So very well spotted. Yeah, they have improved dForce quite a lot, haven't they, over the years? Very cool. I might just go and save my scene here because I'm partial to that. Let's go save the scene and put that on my desktop dForce stream. I'll call it ball scene. There we go. And I might leave some of my objects, as they are, namely the wind node. I might just leave that as it is. Don't know why my computer is so slow, but it's one of those things. It's not a good computer day. This morning I did a stream and I didn't get any, didn't have any upload speeds. Crazy. Let me go and delete these bits here. I'll leave the ground plane in place just because, you know, I can. And I'll go and leave my my wind node. I might push that forward a little bit so that it's more closer to here, and then I'll go and let's make that flag now. I'll go and bring in another cloth, new primitive, there we go, and it'll be a plane. It'll have a size of maybe 2 meters, and it'll have 100 divisions. That's okay, but it won't have the Y positive. It'll have something else, something like the Z or X positive. Let's do Z positive, and that means it won't lie flat. It should now stand up, and it does that as well. Very good. Doesn't look much like a flag. Let's put it right in the middle and stretch it down a little bit so that it looks more like, you know, more like a flag here. And the flag is going to be moved by the wind modifier. And it's fairly easy to do that. And I'll do this because I'll show you another aspect of dForce, and that is the weight nodes. So I'll select it first with the surfaces tab. I'll give it a nice little color again, because color is important. Any particular color, maybe like a dark purple. Is that a good color? Loving it already. And once again, if I hit the big simulate button, dForce is going to tell me, hey, this thing doesn't have anything that I can simulate. So let's go do this again on the little hamburger icon in the simulation settings tab. Let's go and add a dForce dynamic surface. Like that. That gives me all the simulation properties here. And you'd think, hey, since this worked so well last time, let's go and make sure our gravity isn't going up. Let's go and make it 1 again, because it's kind of Earth gravity. You can go and simulate this again. And you think, hey, that's not very exciting. The whole thing just falls to the floor. Well, that's lame, isn't it? That's not the kind of flag behavior we were looking for. So let's not do that. There's something else that we need to do here. One of two things, in fact. We can go and escape to stop the simulation. We could say, hey, the gravity, maybe I don't want this thing to pull my flag down. Maybe I'll set the gravity to 0. That's a possibility. But because we've got that wind node there, what is likely is that it'll start simulating, and should it now not just blow the flag away? I guess it doesn't. But it also doesn't move, so also not the solution we were looking for. And so the way around this is that dForce allows you to add something called the weight map that you might be familiar with from other properties. A weight map is technically a texture that is applied to the whole object that lets dForce know how much a part of an object should be influenced. So let's set the gravity back to 1, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So the weight node, what I can tell dForce is to say, hey, rather than influence everything here, make sure part of my flag is not influenced. And that would be commonly on this side where the flag's attached to the flagpole. So there needs to be a small little strip that exists in geometry, but that isn't influenced by dForce, and hence also not wafted in the wind. And let me show you how that works. So we need a combination of the geometry editor and the weight node brush to make that happen. Let's start with the geometry editor first to make our selection here. This is a little scary if you're not familiar with the geometry editor. It's either this little icon here, or it's also under the tools menu, and it's here, the geometry editor. Alt-Shift-G is the default keyboard shortcut for that. If you change to that, then another tab is important to work with it, which is the tool settings tab. This shows you all kinds of exciting things. You might also want to go and switch over to something that shows you the wireframe of your object. And let's go and mark maybe the 2 polygons on the right hand side with that. So I can either, under the if you right click, it has all these types of contextual menus here, and one of them is the drag selection. On selection mode, drag selection. If you do that, then you can left click and drag on your object and make a selection that you want to do something with. I don't really want to do that. I mean, I could, with a really steady hand, try and do this, but I can already see I'm not a master at that. So there's another way to do that, and that is first of all, unselect everything. Under geometry selection, clear selection, you can look at this directly from an angle like the front or the right, depending on what we need. Change the selection mode once again by right clicking and saying selection mode marquee selection, and that now lets you left click and drag, barely visible in the stream, but you can now left click and drag and then just basically select a whole group of polygons here, like those ones. So this is my selection. With it in place, you can choose to save it. You don't have to. You go over to the next tool, which is this one here. That is the weight brush tool, and you can either click that or you can go and use it from the tool option here, node weight map brush, and once again have the tool settings open. Your selection is still in place, I think. Yes, it is. You just don't see it yet because we currently don't have a dForce weight map on our object. We need to create that first. So that means we need to go and select our plane, head over here to create, and choose dForce modifier weight node. And when we do that, that map gets applied to our object. It also comes up with a little context dialog that offers to parent it to our current plane. Let's do that. It just comes up underneath it and it's kind of, in there. Now we can see the selection. And that is just the node. That's not actually the map. I'm so sorry, it's just so complicated, but bear with me and follow these steps at home. It'll be just awesome. Once you get to know this principle, you're gonna have lots of fun with that. we have the node, we don't have the map yet. So for that, we need to go and pick one from here. You have all kinds of types of maps that allows clothing creators to really be granular about what their clothing needs to look like. We're happy with the influence weights and just hit add map, and that will now make your map. And you can see that everything's red. Red means 100% influence. So everything, and this is exactly what we have by default, everything on an object is influenced. What we want to do now is subtract the influence from this selection on the right hand side that we've made with the geometry editor. So to do that, there's another exciting little tool for that. You can just right click somewhere here and say weight editing, fill selected. And currently they're filled with 100% of influence, but we don't want to do that. We go and say fill selected and bring up that little window over here and say, well, it's actually 79%. I'm going to go and turn this to 0. So this strip that simulates the flag being attached to the flagpole, I don't want to participate in our simulation at all. And if I hit apply, then you can see that the color changes here. Let me go take the selection away. Geometry selection, clear all, and then you can see that it's changed color here. Hopefully gone down to 0. I think it is. It's just my color that's showing now. I think if I go into wire shaded, no, it's still there. It's just lit wireframe. It is. Let's just assume it's 0, like I suspected, like I wanted it to be. I can go back to filament and try to get out of this and try to simulate my cloth again. Let me choose my universal manipulator again and try my simulation again. See what happens. See if it's actually worked. It has worked. Look at that. A strip of my cloth is not being moved at all. And the rest of the flag, well, it kind of collapses. So it's not exactly what I wanted. But in principle, the thing that I didn't want to influence is still a static object. And all the other polygons on this flag are now wafting around, which is kind of cool. And once again, 3D is emulating reality there. If you've seen some flags, if they had a flag like this on the moon, this is what it would just look like, and it wouldn't move around at all. Somehow it did move around. Kind of still not entirely sure how that happened. But what some flags have built in is that they have a little bit of a stabilizer at the top of the flag that holds the flag up. Maybe not completely, so it's not 100% stiff, or in our case, it doesn't have 0% influence. But we can make another selection on our object and just take the influence off a little bit so that it doesn't fall apart, like collapse in on itself like this, but just is a little bit stronger at the top. So, let's do that. Marco, also good idea. Let's enlarge the wind cylinder. We can do that. Yes, play around with it and see what you find. So this is kind of, I'd like for it to stay like this, but I don't want it to do that. I'd like for it to move around and waft around, but I don't want it to do that. So let's go and see if we can do that. I'll go and look at it from the front again. It's kind of cool. You have to just repeat these steps time and time again. The first thing we need to do, make sure our object is selected. Weight nodes, perfect. Let's go check that geometry editor once again. And let's go and look at some wireframes here, like so. And let's go and, just like we did before, let's select the top row of polygons here, just these ones here. Doesn't have to be, maybe a little bit more, like the first 2 rather than the first 1. That's not that important. 3 is also good. 3 is also good. We've selected that. Let's go back to the node weight brush tool and then right click and fill that, not with 0 because that makes it also completely static. That means nothing is going to move. We're going to go and fill selected with something like, I don't know, let's try 80 or 90, something like that. You can try multiple values there and just see how it comes out. I'm going to try 80. So the top is, it still has some influence, but not all the influence that the rest of this has. Oops, that's iRay. I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. Filament's fine. Filament's good enough. And back on the simulation settings and simulate. See what happens. Fingers crossed, and it's getting there. It's getting there. Look at that. It's a flag. It's moving. It's moving. I mean, you can also, if you have a longer animation, you want to make it more interesting. Imagine what would happen if you take the wind node and you'd animate the wind node that it goes like a fan, just from left to right and back. That'll agitate the flag in all kinds of different bits and pieces. So I love little experiments like that. And it just, you know, if you keep playing with it, look at how beautiful that looks. Quite crazy. You can make it longer. You can simulate it longer. Try 300 frames and just let it waft in the wind 500 or 1,000 frames. That is just so cute. You can roll around it. You can default. You can decal your logo onto it, or you can make a texture that makes it look cool. And we've only done this in, like, you know, a few minutes. If you know where to look for these things, it's just absolutely awesome. And I think one of my idols is, in fact, you probably have heard of him, RG Cincy. Richard Schaffenmeyer, I believe, is his real name. And he started with his dForce journey about 2017. And he's just had so much fun figuring out what you can do. There's a thread, Brian, if you can find that link, put that in the chat. He's made a very long thread on the forum that shows you all his experiments. He's had 3 massive PDF documents, all available for free. There's even, I think Paul Bussey just made a video with him, Digital Art Live, that you can get on the store. It's beautiful to just explore his journey and try these experiments yourself, and you're gonna have so much fun with dForce. And I thought I'd lay the foundation because, of course, under the hood, dForce works just like that on clothing items that you buy from the store. But knowing these foundations will make the working with dForce that's applied to clothing a whole lot easier, and we'll come to that now. All right, yes, absolutely. Good point. How do you loop animations? Yeah, that's a DAZ Studio thing. That's this thing here. So if that is on, do you see that here? Yes, you're just about to. If that is on the loop button, then it just keeps looping. If you switch that off, then it has these 2 arrows, and that means the animation is only going to be played once, and the play is going to stop afterwards. And if you want to just keep looping over it, then you can switch it to loop. If you wanted to preview a smaller part of the animation, you can also do that. There's a play range at the bottom here that you can go and left click and drag and then expand a portion of your timeline that you want to zoom into. And it kind of corresponds to these text fields here under range. So when you left click and drag this portion, then you zoom into a smaller part of the timeline. You can also left click and drag this whole bar, and that'll then move this part that you're currently previewing. And I think looping also works with that. Yeah, so if you do that, then it only shows you the loop bit of this part of the animation. It's a handy tool to have. I mean, even if you're not into animations, dForce happens in 4-dimensional space, so it takes time into consideration. So knowing a little bit about the timeline is an advantage. Absolutely. Yes, if I go and move this further to the end, then I'll see more of the end there. I think I can do this on the fly as well. Let's look at a larger part, but not look at the top there. Look at that, it's almost sellable as a loopable animation. Very cool. The easiest way, if you do want to loop this, is actually to, if you ever wanted to make that happen, not show the first 30 frames because they would include the whole static thing. Pick something that looks kind of nice, maybe frame 20 or so. Start there, then render the animation out until the end. Take the same stuff and reverse it and put it at the back, and then that makes it into a loopable experience. So it'll go from here to there, back to here. So you don't see where the thing starts or stops. It's a cheap and easy way to make a loopable animation if you ever need to do that. Why stop at 1 fan? Absolutely, let's put 12 fans in. We have a few other things to get through, but I think that was all the basics I can tell you. I think so. Equipped with that knowledge, let's go. Let me save the scene here as well. And we're equipped with that knowledge. Flag scene. I don't know why my computer hesitates. Save. Why does it hesitate? Let me go create a brand new scene and play with characters now. So equipped with this knowledge, let's go and bring in a Genesis, just regular Genesis figure with my stream safe textures here. Genesis, let's do 8.1 tanned. I like it. And try an outfit, and I'll show you how to simulate outfits both for a standing pose as well as for a sitting pose. So those are things that may or may not explode dForce outfits. So let's just hope that's not going to happen. Oh, okay. Yes, Matthew, you would literally just go tone down the wind intensity on the wind node. I think when I first added it, it was very slim, around I think 5 miles per hour. And if you increase that to, I think in my example I had about 20, and if you decrease that again to 10 or 5, then the flag would barely move. So that's how you can decrease that. Yes, it's the strength on the wind node. And again, you can, because it's a node, you can animate it as well. You can make it move from left to right. So, you know, be creative. Have a look at what you can come up with. Oh yeah, applying dForce to non-dForce hair. The trouble is, the more geometry you have, the more you have, the more simulation you have. Number one. So hair that is not necessarily made for dForce might intersect. So dForce tends to explode if geometry intersects with one another. And that's why non-dForce hair is often not really suitable for deforcing. But many clothing creators, including Biscuits, I believe, who's in the chat, who have started producing dForce hair as well as tips and tricks in there. So the other thing is that you might see that that hair that isn't meant to be deforced might intersect with the main character. dForce doesn't like that, it explodes. Other times the hair would droop too much, so it might intersect with places that you don't want it to intersect with. So there's the dForce hair creators have come up with all kinds of interesting tips and tricks for that not to happen. So yes, not quite recommended. Much like applying dForce for clothing that isn't made for dForce. Sometimes when you have two pieces of geometry, like on a dress, you have the front and the back. Sometimes when they're not welded together and you apply dForce regardless, the dress will just go split at all parts and just fall down, and it might not work. There are workarounds, of course. You can take it into a 3D application and make sure you weld it, but often, you know, this is just something dForce has only been around for a few years. So before then, clothing creators haven't always adhered to the fact that it needs to behave fairly realistically. But nowadays, many outfits do that. Let me go and apply something from the Jada bundle that you can get at a discount, by the way. The Jada bundle comes with two very exciting outfits. So this one is the Disco Flare outfit for Genesis, and there's also this one here, which is the, Cinder Blues Rycroft clothing outfit. I love that outfit. Very retro, very wonderful, and it's very wafty. It's a very light piece of clothing, and it just falls into all kinds of places. So let's use this on my figure. It also comes with a dForce hat. I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to use the dress and just apply it to my figure. So it doesn't have materials by default, but we can just go add some. I had one of my supporters ask me recently, hey, I've just loaded an item from the library, but it's all white. Well, I don't know what to do. I'm new to Dare Studio, and I said, well, select the clothing item, pick a material that fits on it, and that will hopefully load that. And if it doesn't do that, there's another issue. Turns out there was another issue, so I'm glad we could work it out. So for you as a user, if I just use this dress as an example, for you as a user, it's usually enough if you apply clothing as you used to, and then go find the pose that you want your character to be in. I don't really know what to pick. There is wasn't there one? Let's try some of the roller girl poses, some of the standing poses. I'll show you both the standing poses and the sitting poses in a moment. This one is for the regular Genesis figure. These are for the Jada character. We'll just use the regular Genesis figure and apply that pose to the character. there. This already looks fairly nice because most items of clothing are both conforming as well as dForce capable. So you can see that it's almost there already, but I suppose for a standing pose like that, we probably want the skirt to fall and the arms, depending on what the material is, to kind of settle so that we avoid things like this. So let's see what this looks like just with the default parameters before we start looking at others. So once again, knowing that this is a dForce outfit, if you don't, you can always have a look at the clothing item in question. Have a look at the Surfaces tab. And this dress only has one material zone, and it has indeed the simulation options here applied. So that means it's a dForce clothing item and you can simulate it. If that isn't there, your item, either hair or item of clothing, is not dForce compatible. And you can either try to make that yourself or, you know, pick a different clothing item. So knowing it is dForce, also the title often gives it away, so that's the other good thing. And with the default settings, your current frame, I'll just go and click simulate and see what happens. You see that the figure is going back into the A pose, and that's another setting I will show you in a moment. You can enable or disable that. Often it is desirable to let it do that because the A pose is specifically designed, unlike the T pose, for clothing to kind of fit without intersecting with one another. So there's pros and cons to this approach. Sometimes the figure moves, and it's really nice to start from an A pose and move the figure into the pose that you need and let dForce frame by frame kind of sort out what you need to do there. So we can see that just with the default values, the skirt is properly draped, the arms are properly draped. There's also, whoops, I'm so sorry, sweetie, I didn't mean to do that. There's also no poke through. That's the other cool thing that dForce magically fixes, usually. That doesn't mean you don't always need to have adjustments, but it's a really nice way of avoiding poke through altogether. So one thing that I really like about dForce is the fact that clothing creators don't have to put a gazillion figure morphs into their clothing to make sure it follows properly if you're dialing in a particular figure morph. But as custom characters have exploded over the last years, that is no longer a usable approach, really, because you can't, as a clothing creator, make your outfit and then go and put 4,000 custom figure morphs in there. It's just impossible. You can maybe use a few base figures to get the user started, but there's always one variation that isn't in there. So that's where dForce really comes in handy. And even with the default, we're doing really well here. This is nice. But so what I showed you there, if I go and clear this, it goes back to this. And what I showed you here, when I simulate, it starts from the A pose. And that's a setting in dForce that says start from the memorized pose. We don't have to use that. And there's pros and cons to it. Sometimes I have a pose that's in a position that I'm happy with, and I don't want it to move from here to there. I just want it to settle. I basically just want the clothing item that is now in a slightly wonky position just fall down and, you know, just fall and settle. Let me show you how to do that. So we'll go and clear this. That is up here on the simulation settings tab again, and that is under, is it under the first one? Yes, the first one, initialization. This one here. When I hover, the name is a bit too long. Start bones from memorized pose. So if I go and switch that off and then simulate, then my figure doesn't go into the A pose first, and the item just settles as it is. Sometimes this looks better, sometimes it doesn't. Often you might also find that 30 frames is just not enough. I've already showed you how to make that longer. If you have a feeling that, especially when moving from one pose to another, 30 frames isn't enough, or you need longer, you can increase that. That's under duration. Current frame is this, so just that frame. We've looked at the animated play range already. You can also use custom if you ever wanted to do that. Then you can type in your own preferred simulation range without doing anything to the timeline. So sometimes when you've got your timeline set to something that you want to use as part of an animation, you say, I can't really reutilize that at the same time for the dForce simulation. You can always go and override that here. So if I go and put 60 here now, and then clear and then simulate, then what would happen is that that dForce is now going to take twice as long to make the dress settle. continuing the simulation, right? Like resume simulation. Yeah, that I don't think that exists. I don't think that exists. And on a render, it does exist, but on dForce, I don't think it exists. So standing pose is usually very simple to do, and often things don't really go wrong. Where things may go wrong is in fact on sitting poses. Let me show you how to do one of those. If I go back all the way so that our character is in the A pose, this is one of those things where you probably want to utilize the timeline here. And I might go and do that right away. I'm going to switch this duration to the timeline play range because for dForce to understand that I want to sit my figure down, I need to really tell it how sitting down would happen in real life. So in real life, we just don't start with a half crumpled piece of cloth while we're already sitting down and then trying to settle it. dForce doesn't like that. You're going to have to tell it, well, here's a seat, here's a figure moves towards the seat and actually moves in the seated position. And dForce will understand that. But again, you need to help it out a little bit for that to be, for the results to be good. I could use another cube for her to sit down, but I might not do that. I might go and utilize something that is part of the diner animation that I've made earlier, namely like a diner booth. Let's do that. I'm not going to select anything. I might go, is it under environments? The double triangle diner, from Decagon Studios, one of my very favorite environments. Very exciting. Comes with a ton of props, and I might just go and use maybe this one here, the double chair. I think it also comes with a single chair option. This one here, DTD single chair. I'm going to go and bring that in and put it into position, making absolutely sure I'm on frame 0 of my animation. Very important. Maybe I'll just leave it open. And it's rotated the wrong way, so let's go and give you a little seat here. Like so, exactly minus 90. Oops. And say the seat is here, or I could leave it in the middle. I don't really mind. We just need to make sure. Let's move it. Let's move it out of the way. Let's say this is where the seat is in your environment, and you've brought your figure as close as you can towards it, and you want her to sit down in it. And for that, you're going to have to tell dForce how to do that. So on the first frame, with your character selected, she needs to be in the A pose. We should also clear the animation here. Let's go and clear that. Ding. On frame 0, she needs to be in this position. So let's go and set a keyframe on her. Then on the last frame, whichever that is, could be 30, could be 60. We'll try 30, and if it doesn't work, we'll try 60. On the last frame of your animation, you want to have the sitting position. Let's see how that works. Let's see if we have any under poses, roller girl poses. There might be some sitting poses. I'm sure there are. They're sitting on the ground. They're standing next to a chair. Is that kind of sitting on a chair type thing? There's something like that. We could try that. We can try that. She's kind of leaning on a table here. See if we can find something that isn't necessarily leaning on a table. Is there something? I don't see it. Let's try it. Let's see what this is like. So make sure you're on the last frame of the animation and dial in your seated pose. And this might work. We don't have a table. Let's not worry about the table. But also we need to put her into position. So I need to push her back to where she should be sitting. And this is all on the last frame of the animation. And one other thing, you want to make sure she does not intersect with the geometry like that. That's very important, because if she is at any point during the simulation process, it'll mean that dForce is going to try to make this happen, but won't be very successful. So let's go and bring her up just a little bit. This is okay. Just look at the character and her legs, that they shouldn't intersect, because it means dForce is going to have major difficulties in figuring out where the dress needs to go. So you need to have a little bit of a gap between the chair and the figure so that the dress has space in the middle to kind of settle down. If you don't do that, we're going to explode it. So let's do something like that. And don't worry if it appears to be a little bit too high right now. Yeah, I see the other leg is still intersecting, so ideally we don't really want that. So let's do that. Yeah, including this. This is still a little bit too. That'll be the ticket here. Whoops. Yeah, so there's a little bit of space that dForce can work that out. If this is still too big a gap, you can correct that later. That's no problem. But for the animation to work like this, this is a start. Also, be prepared to try this multiple times until you get until you find the correct simulation for your needs. Let's try this out. See what happens. So we should go back to here, and now we're gradually moving the figure back while dForce is calculating at every frame what the dress is supposed to look like. Now pray. Go like this and hope it works. Usually when dForce slows down a lot during like the frame by frame animation, it's a good indication that an explosion is imminent. I'll show you how that looks. I'm sure you've seen it before. So there we go. This is now settled down and nothing's exploded, which is really nice. So she's not quite down enough. So this is something else that you can fix with another little trick with the magic of a smoothing modifier. You could create an indentation in the seat so that she and her dress actually have space to sink in. And that's also what would happen in real life when you have a seat that kind of, the moment the person sits in, it kind of bends down. So we could talk about that if you like. That's another possibility. But just for now, I think it'll be effective enough if we just, on the last frame, just go put the whole figure down a little bit. And that's probably forgivable. It would be even cooler if we had that indentation. I might just show you how to make that. I don't want to make it too complicated because it's not really dForce topic, but it'll help with that simulation. Yeah, because the dress is intersecting here. I mean, the good thing is now that you're in this position, if you wanted to make any other quick fixes and small changes, you can always use Blender or Hexagon or ZBrush to make those changes. And you can, of course, also, if you feel this isn't settled enough, you can just increase the amount of frames. Let's do that. Let's bring her, deliberately sit her down like that, which is what novices might do. You do this and you go, hey, I'm going to go and clear the simulation and I'll go and have her start again. This is usually what happens when you do that. You have intersecting geometry and then you run dForce on it and then things explode. And it's just because, intersecting geometry, dForce doesn't like that. See, pause. dForce is visibly slowing down. And oh, I was lucky. I was seriously lucky here. So this is, you're not always this lucky. So try it out. So this is a much better result of the figure now actually sitting on the chair and the cloth draping correctly over it. So this is actually really nice. I'm really pleased with that. That is very, very cool. I didn't think it was going to do that because there's clearly some intersections going on here. Wow. That is very, very cool. I do like that. That is very nice. So, but this is usually the moment where you had, this is exactly right, Riverthorn. I didn't explode because I wanted it to. That's usually how it works, isn't it? The demonstration effect. Let me just quickly show you that. Pfft, computer crashes. You go, opposite is also true. Hey, this is when dForce explodes. Nothing happens. You go, ah, okay. Good to see you, by the way. Very good to see you. Shall we try again? Shall we try to make it explode deliberately again? Shall we try? Let's try. You all know what explosions look like. So I'm definitely, this is going to explode for sure. This is definitely going to explode. Come on, let's try this. Explosion free, exactly. Pushing dForce to its limits. My goodness. What's this guy doing? Misty had an intuition. Oh, exciting. What's your intuition say now? Mine says, first time I'm wishing something to explode. No, I wish nothing ever to explode. I'll see what happens now. I can't watch. It's the it did work again. This is nice. Actually, this is really nice. I'm happy. I think the second version was even better than this one, but dForce is behaving wonderfully today. This is really nice. Often when you're in the process of, it doesn't look good here, does it? The sunken in character. Often when you make clothing, and I often watch my buddy Chris, he streams over on Twitch. He makes dForce clothing. And we're basically explosion buddies. Every time I try it from scratch to apply dForce to an item of clothing, things just go poof, just with normal poses, And that's often because items in the outfits intersect with one another. So if you had something like a belt or a belt buckle or collar or something, just folds that intersect with one another. Even something like a top and a separate pair of trousers that might intersect with one another. At any given point, it just goes Right, exactly. Multiple layers of clothing, DG Seeker. That is exactly what brings that about. Yes, oops, it worked. Oucharoo. But in principle, this is how you make your sitting poses, and you can make it, you can make it longer. But in principle, you have to tell dForce, hey, this is where the character starts. Then they move into position, and then things can settle down that way. So let's try one other thing. Imagine you had done this and you say, hey, I'm not entirely happy, first of all, with the character. It's a bit too deep in the seat. I'm going to make it a little bit, not quite sitting so deep in the seat. But I find also that the item of clothing hasn't quite settled down enough. I wish there was a way that I can keep my position, but I want dForce to render this in more frames. There's multiple ways of doing it. My favorite is literally just opening the timeline and just sticking with the timeline play range here, and first of all expanding this to the amount you want, so like in my case 60 frames plus 1, and then you can go and take this keyframe that's now at frame 30 and just move that further back. That's one option. The other option is also, I think you can just go and increase the frame rate, like the frames per second. That's a possibility. Let me show you how to do this with moving the keyframe. So that's just in case you didn't know this on the timeline. The triangles, can you see that? Maybe this is better. Can you see that better? The triangles aren't actually keyframes. Just in case you didn't know this, triangles are markers that show you where keyframes on the timeline are hiding. So somewhere inside Genesis 8.1 on this frame there are keyframes, but this is not the actual keyframe. DAZ Studio is trying to be nice and gives you this option that you can right click and say copy these selected keyframes. So keys could be one, could be multiple. You can use that and try it out. Move the playhead somewhere else, like to the last frame here to 60, and then go and right click again and choose paste paste keys, there we go. And often it works, sometimes it does not. It's also left clicking and dragging doesn't always work, especially for triangles. You can now go and use this keyframe or this group of keyframe to just delete it. Or what you can do is you can open up the character here and find where the keyframes are. Sometimes this requires digging. Like under general transform, I can see where these keyframes are here under translation. And here's these two keyframes. Those are actual keyframes. So the round bits, they are keyframes. And they can usually be left clicked and dragged. They can also be copied and pasted. You can copy and paste the translation independently of the X independently of the Y and so forth. But there's so many more that often this approach with the triangles is the easier one. Just wanted you to know that these are the keyframes, the triangles are not. So it's something to be aware of. You can still just collapse this. You can still delete all of these in place. I do that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. As I said, I think DAZ Studio is still working on it, actually. This is the bit that I wished did not go wrong. And of course, that's the one that actually does go wrong. One of those things. Let's go try and do this again. Delete selected keys, and yes, there we go. That's done. That's done that. Perfect. So now I have my last keyframe set that was on frame 30 is now on frame 60. And if I go and do this all again, I can go and clear my simulation properties. And now dForce is going to do this over a course of 60 frames. It'll take a bit longer, but if you move your character a lot, then you can see that sometimes the dress is kind of moving forward too much as you position your character. And by increasing the frames, it'll be that effect is going to be much less so. Pro tip, Brian, never select the keyframe and then press the delete button, because that deletes your current object in the scene tab. Yes, haven't we all been there? Many, many times. One of those things. The good thing about dForce is that we can talk about many, many other things, because simulation takes a little bit of time. One of those things. I'm just going to go through some of your questions while dForce is rendering. My mods have been hard at work to say to compile your questions on a little message board that we have on a Discord here. I'm just going to go through it. If there's anything that I can answer that hasn't been already answered. Colleen Hoffenbacher, can we change a dForce skirt or dress to be conforming? You can. I mean, literally many clothing creators do that as to begin with. Everything starts out more or less as an OBJ in DAZ Studio, and then you apply the dForce properties. As I said, my buddy Chris does this quite regularly. He builds clothing with Marvelous Designer as well as Blender, and then usually turns it into dForce compatible clothing. Brian, if you can drop a link to Chris's channel in there, that'd be awesome. Because it's really nice to see Chris at work, and I've picked up so many tips and tricks. I know this creator, he is a Marvelous Designer, or rather Clo kind of guru, Daniel. Don't know if you've heard of him, also known as Jet Set Geometry. And he builds clothing in Clo, and that's just a Clo project or Marvelous Designer project. And he makes these available for free, and they're superb test pieces. You can download them and try to convert them into dForce yourself. I sometimes do that on my personal channel, and it's just wonderful to just, get into it, try out things. If it works, awesome. If not, don't worry too much about it. Clothing creators know much more about this than I do, but it is certainly a nice pastime, I have to say. Yoshi, is there a way to make the simulation randomly behave, or does it behave the same way all the time? Good question. It does behave the same way all the time, because the movement is usually the same every time. So how dForce or how the clothing simulation programs work is basically by figuring out a collision between say in our case, the character and the couch and the deforceable object. So it'll be able to bend that unless it hits something else. So if the animation of the character is always the same, then the outcome is always going to be the same, plus minus 0.001%, I guess. But if you introduce variation into this by changing the speed at which the character sits down, by changing the frame rate, or maybe by adding wind to your animation, that'll certainly add some variation to how this is. But you can pretty much rely on the fact that if all parameters stay the same and you rerun the simulation, it should all stay pretty much the same. Renzero, is a deformer different to dForce? Yes, it is. Actually, I may just show you something that is related to a deformer, and let's do that by making the dress invisible. There. Thanks to my stream safe textures, it doesn't actually matter. We're not showing nudity, which is important. This couch here, a deformer, is a thing that's a modifier inside DAZ Studio, and this is kind of fits right in with this topic here. A deformer, actually no, I'm thinking of something else. A deformer is something that changes geometry. I'm thinking of what's it called again? I am thinking of something very much related. Edit object geometry. add a smoothing modifier. That is what I'm thinking of. So deformer is a node that you set up, and then you can pull or push geometry. It's often cumbersome to use in DAZ Studio. I tend to not do that. I tend to use these effects in external modeling applications and then just bring in that as a morph. So it's essentially a poor man's way of putting a dimple somewhere or putting an influence onto an object, changing the geometry in some way. There's something cooler, and this is what I wanted to show you really. It's the smoothing modifier. It's kind of related. If I apply this to my couch here now, we see that nothing is really happening, which is kind of cool, but it takes something under mesh smoothing up here. It takes something that is a collision item. And this collision item can be literally anything that you want. So in my case, let me use the actual character. So I go and pick my Genesis female character for this as a collision item. And I'm not going to do anything at the moment. It doesn't really show anything. But as I move my playhead, it will start colliding with this object. And the smoothing modifier is going to go to work and introduce this little dimple underneath her bottom. And currently it looks a little bit crumpled, but it creates that indentation that I was talking about. Depends if I move her into it too much, it won't look too great. So you can see that the couch is kind of you know, making ways to climb up on her. We don't really want to do that, so I might go and on the last frame of the animation I might just go and move her up a little bit and let the dForce let the smoothing modifier do the rest. So the other thing I can do now is add a few more iterations here. I maybe make it 10. That might make it better. And that creates that indentation underneath my character. So if I go and make my character invisible, this looks much more realistic, like an actual couch now that where somebody's sitting on. You can do this manually as well, but the cool thing is if I do this with DAZ Studio, and since it's a dynamic effect, if I were to move my character, be it visible or not, if I go and move her over here, the indentation is going to be at a different position. So this is kind of a cool way of making sure your objects react. If somebody's lying in the bed or whatever, this is what things could look like. Kind of awesome. Now the problem is if you use a trick like that, dForce isn't going to know that this thing is going to bend unless the character actually hits it. So what could happen is if we run the simulation again, the clothing is, or the cloth is still going to kind of dig in. So there's clever ways around it. You can go and take this object, now that it's morphed, out and import it again as a morph like I showed you earlier, and then this becomes essentially a slider at this point. So you can go and add that to your scene and add a bit of extra realism to it. Let's go and we'll see what happens when we bring our character back and we bring our clothing back, and we'll just see if dForce is happy with it in this current shape or form. Let's go and just clear this and rerun the animation. Simulation even. Let's see. Does my butt look big in this? I remember that fast show. Good times. Good times. This could explode now. Let's bear with me. Let's see what happens. Matthew, about the fan scene, what happens if you move the fan back? There's less flapping. It kind of depends on how far you've set the influence zones. I've kind of touched on that. The fan or the wind node can have a larger influence or smaller influence. There could also be a fall off. But if you move it, it's a bit like moving a light away. Eventually it loses intensity. So yes, that's true. Enchanted April, all I see on the question is, for me, it never works with real animations like walking. Could you show how to do this? Like maybe add the dress to the character and then make her walk? I can try. We can see what happens. Yeah, we do have about half an hour left. So yeah, let's make it happen. Let's try it. So look, we're actually extremely lucky. dForce is behaving seriously nice today. So it does that indentation from the character, not from the clothing, and it seems to be working extremely well today. So that is very cool. Usually, I'd have to resort to a lot more trickery. This is kind of the the reverse of what usually happens with me and sitting animations. Very nice. So we're extremely lucky today. You can use both of these tricks in conjunction. Wow. Neat. Lee Dunning, is there a way to keep the overlapping clothing pieces play nice together? You could try. It kind of depends on the clothing. It's a difficult question to answer. I would try to simulate in stages. So make sure you simulate the inner thing first, the inner or the thing on the below, and simulate that in one pass. When you're happy, freeze it, then simulate the next one, and so forth. That might work. Long hair, we can try long hair. We can do walking. Let's try walking maybe. I haven't tried that in a while, so let's see if I also have issues. Let's try it. And then we'll have a look at hair. And Matthew, I can certainly show what happens if we add wind to something like a character with hair. Let's try walking, and then let's try hair, and then let's try wind and hair. Let's see what happens. What could possibly go wrong? I might stay with this character here. Shall I save this? Yeah, let's save this while we're here. Yes, absolutely, Marco. It's a good idea. I can also add a subdivision surface modifier to the seat. Often that works. Sometimes it does not. Kind of depends on the prop if it holds up for the geometry. This one I think does. I think I've tried that before. I'll show you that in a minute. I'll call this Dyna Booth maybe, because it's almost like a Dyna Booth. Yeah. So what Matthew is talking about is that as you add a higher level of subdivision to it, I'll just go make my character invisible, and this is on the Dyna chair now. If you add under Edit Object Geometry, Convert to Sub D, you'll see that things get a little bit smoother. So the indentation of where she's sitting looks even more natural now. So that is something that you can do, and improves your renders even more. Not all geometry is suitable for that, but this is looking pretty sweet, I have to say. Look at the cloth, how it folds. This is nice. You can also, if your clothing item has that, you can still make adjustments after dForce. That's another thing I should maybe show you, that if you now wanted the dress to be a little bit longer, you can still do that, or you can do other kind of fit adjustments to it. You can do that, because sometimes you don't really know when they need to happen. And adjustment skirt back out, that's probably not what we want. But the morphs that are in the clothing, they still work. So just wanted to show you that. It's cuff right expand. Oh, there we go. So you can, all these types of morphs, they still work even after dForce. And if you want to experiment, you can set this up before and then let dForce run. So both of these things are possible. Let's try a quick walking animation. It'll take longer to render, but we can do it. We can do it. Let me start with a brand new character. In fact, a brand new scene for that. And let's deal with just a quick 30 or 60 frame walk cycle first. I haven't done that in a while. Let's do that. I'll use my regular 8. Maybe I'll use a Genesis 8 character for that. It depends on, kind of depends on how I have. Do I have any? Question. Let's look around. That's the eye blink. I wasn't really prepared. And I think we're back, which is awesome. I'm glad I have a backup. So hey, this is cool. Welcome back. We didn't lose the actual URL. So sometimes what YouTube does is when I stop a stream, then switch over to my backup, it sometimes loses the URL and YouTube finishes the stream. But I'm very happy to say that has not happened. So ha ha ha, very good. I'm so glad this is kind of working. Awesome. Let's see, where were we now? There, dForce and stuff. Yes, I remember. So what have we got? We've got this going here. That's neat. I'm going to switch to my animated timeline, and I'll go and see what happens if we have an Aniblock as a walk cycle and just go hit simulate. It should now go ahead and, I see I've done it again. Don't use the memorized pose for this. Initialization, not memorized pose. Just go and simulate from here. Let's see what happens. Oh my, yes, explosions can be terrifying, I tell you. Right, so it looks like nothing is moving at all, but that's probably because of the Aniblock. So I'm assuming that was the problem that you had as well. You're very welcome, Jeff. I'm glad that you learned so much. Maybe we can hope the stream is not quite finished. So if you're in this situation, what I would do, and I've never been in this situation, I've never tried this out. You would go and have a look at the bottom here on your animate timeline and say bake to studio keyframes. And when you do that, this whole Aniblock is going to be translated into keyframes. So I would recommend you do this at the end of your animation. And then it'll just calculate a little bit. This Aniblock can now be removed because all these bits and pieces have been put onto the timeline here. And so now when you move the playhead, the character is actually walking by keyframes. So I suppose if you now go and say use animated timeline, this should now move the character frame by frame and let dForce calculate on every frame. It's kind of the classic fashion animation thing. So I've made animations in which I had a walk cycle inside Dash Studio, and then I go and put this into just the character animation into Marvelous Designer, let Marvelous Designer calculate the walk, and then bring the cloth from Marvelous Designer back. Look at that. It's actually pretty nifty. Hands sticking into the cloth. Yeah, I know that problem. I know that phenomenon. There's many things that you can do there, up until and including having repel volumes, as well as doing things like hiding hands and stuff like that. This is a very wafty outfit. I should really make a longer animation and see if I can properly animate this as a kind of a fashion walk cycle. That'd be cool. So yeah, but that was the trick, transferring the Aniblock into keyframes on the timeline and then running dForce, and then dForce knows what to do per frame. Thank you so much, Yoshi. I really appreciate that. Alethea, let me see if I understand you. How to make deformer with smoothing, not to make my chair move away automatically from the character every time I try to move the character to the chair. It's trolling you. It's probably because you had moved the chair on the last keyframe. So make sure the chair isn't animated. Make sure the chair stays the same on frame 1 as it does on the last frame of your animation. If you move the chair, you can also sit the character down and move the chair towards the character. I tend to not do that because it's not quite as realistic, but yeah, that's probably the problem. Me too. I love this dress as well. Cinder Blue, absolutely wonderful. Part of the Jada Roller Girl bundle. Don't we all? No, I'm quite happy with my system. This is, just in case you're wondering, this is HP Z800 workstation. It's fairly old, with 48 gigabytes of RAM and 2 RTX 2080 graphics cards. What was the other thing we're going to do? Hair. Right, let's do hair. I'm not sure if we can do hair and walking. Let's make a new scene. I'm going to go and save this actually. G8 dForce walk, and let's try hair and wind. That was it. So I'll try to apply a regular standing pose, and then maybe have an animation that's about 90 to 120 frames, and then have wind on it. I don't want her to walk on every frame, but you know, maybe we can try. Is that maybe a bit too much? Yeah, that's a bit too much. Let's just do a standing pose with wafty hair done by the wind node. I'm thinking that's probably a good idea. Brand new scene. And we'll also feature this dress, because that dress moving in the wind is probably going to be a great idea. Start with another brand new character, and let's say we go with 8.1 again, because then we can probably dial in Jada. Jada hasn't even featured yet, so let's do that. Let's go and try this with a custom character. So on frame 0, let's apply the custom character first. Just the morph. Jinx Jones, no, that's not her. Jada, there we go. I can do that by holding Control as I apply the actor, and then I get this little menu here, and I'll say, just the morphs, please. I could have probably just as easy just dial it in, see what happens. Have a good dinner. I appreciate that. Yes, and I totally agree, hair is dangerous. There's just so much of it. Hair in with or without dForce is problematic because there's just so much geometry. There's that, and then there's also the materials and all. One of those things. Let's go and put that cinder blue outfit back on. Which was here. Any particular preference on the material? We've got blue, we've got kind of a white, and we've got kind of an orange thing, kind of a retro thing. This one is, what is that? So we haven't had that before. It's kind of a flowery outfit. I did actually like this. I gotta say, I dig this material here. Was that it? No, this one here. This is it. This is why I really like that. I don't know why. It's just, you know, it's just nice. And just in case she loses her dress, I'm not going to use the Jada materials because, you know, we're on somebody else's platform. So let's, you know, let's stick with this. dForce hair. So there is dForce hair, I think, in the Jada bundle. One is a stack perm hair. This one here. We could try that. Is that a dForce hair? No, that's not dForce. There is, what's the other one in the Jada bundle? Let me just have a quick look. Jada Roller Girl bundle. This one, I think this is also not dForce, is it? Stack perm and afro hair. There's this one and there's that one. I don't think either of them are dForce hair, so we're going to have to go and find another dForce hair that we can use for the job. Perhaps one of Biscuit's hairs. How's that? Shall we do that? Let's try that. Or maybe I've got any kind of dForce hair that I have here. Anything in here that has dForce. Beachcomber hair. We could try that. That's more for Genesis male, but we can still try that. That's the flower outfit. I don't think that comes with dForce hair, does it? No, I don't think that's dForce hair. There's Noah hair. That is a long hair. That might work really well with the wind, but it could also go horribly, horribly wrong. This is one of Biscuit's hairs. Wonderful. This one here next to it is Biscuit's jam hair. And there's also Biscuit's kid hair. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Biscuit's hair. Kit, perhaps? Should we try Kit? Lee says, try the long one. Nothing can go wrong. I'm thinking, yeah, okay, let's the long one here. This one. Noah hair with dForce. Less is more sometimes. Let's just try, why don't we just try the medium one here? Let's go with jam hair. Jam, okay. Let's do that. Biscuit's jam hair. Pop it on. Still loading. There it is. So dForce hair, if you load it, you might see it looks a little bit freaky, and that's only because the hair is positioned in something equivalent to an A pose. So it's designed that when you have a still pose, it just goes and falls. And this is also going to help us with the wind node, I'm sure. So I'll do it slightly different than before. I'm not going to go and transition from the A pose into another pose. I'm going to dial in a standing pose right away. I might try one from the Roller Girl bundle. Something, now we have the Jada poses, maybe this one here. See what it looks like. That might be kind of cool. And then have a wind node blow literally in her face and let everything just waft back. I'm thinking that might work. See if we find another pose that's equally interesting. How about this one here? Nah, I think the previous one, or just a fashion pose like this. Like that, hey, I think that's going to be nice. Give a little smiley expression as well. I think we have that as well in this bundle. Ding, there we go, perfect. Great. So before we even... So we can simulate it once as a, just to see what it looks like, and then we'll add the wind to it. Let's do that. I think current frame, I'm just going to use the play range again for 30 frames. Let's see what happens. Let's see how it goes. See if we get an explosion afterwards. So hair, be prepared that dForce hair is going to take a long time to simulate, just because the geometry is so large. But you know, we've got the time. I'm good. Yes, true, Trevor and Brian. That is very true. We'll see how it handles it. So far, we've been extremely lucky. So I'm excited to see if we can make some explosions happen. Let's see. If there's any other questions, let me see if I can answer them. Clothing, how are we doing that now? Why do things so often move upwards instead of following gravity? I'm not sure if I've explained, if I've experienced that. I gotta say, to be brutally honest. But keep those questions coming. Their NFT art. Oh yes, absolutely. Do you remember this one DAS studio session I did, Brian, on Twitch? That was one of those interesting ones where something like a monster came out, and I thought, hey, it's not a monster. I think I was importing a morph, wasn't it? A character morph from Blender, and I had the vertex order wrong or something. So what arrived in DAS Studio was more like, and instead what I did is apply a metal shader, duplicate the object somehow, and then sell it as NFT art. When I say sell it, I think we joked about it. I didn't actually sell it. Nor did I put it up for sale. If anyone's interested, do let me know. Very funny. Camilla, absolutely. Simulate the outfit first and then freeze that, then do the hair, then freeze that. So don't do it, basically don't do it like I do, because things take a lot longer than they need to. So hair is one of those things. Leave that absolutely to last. Make sure you're happy with the clothing and then see if the hair works. And if it doesn't, then, you know, find something else. Sometimes that's what you have to do. If an outfit or combination of hair, outfit, environment doesn't quite work, then don't put your computer through so much pain. If you can see early on this isn't working, then it might be best to just change the creative direction a little bit and pick something else. Like hair is dForce hair is beautiful, but it can also take, you know, quite a lot of time to simulate. So these were 30 frames, and now we're basically stabilizing things a little bit. And that's already been 3 minutes. So I can imagine with the wind node to it, I might just have to leave that after the stream finishes, but I'm more than happy to render something out and post it as a video later if we can make it work in principle. Yeah, look at that. It's stabilizing, but it's also stabilizing the hair. So the clothing itself here, that's being stabilized, but also the hair. The things are being just, you know, little locks of hair just kind of fall over. It'll take a while. Yes, indeed, Matthew, absolutely. And also no more multiple simulating things. Once dForce is done calculating, it'll remember it, but it won't then redrape it. So if I had a slightly different leg pose, that would mean I'd have to resimulate the dress, but the hair and the shoulders are kind of in the same position. I could say, hey, I'm good with the hair as it is, and I'll either freeze it and just resimulate the dress, or another thing that you can do, like I showed you in the beginning, you can export the simulated item if you fear it's going to take too long to resimulate, save it out as an OBJ, and then import it again as a morph, as a static morph that you can then dial in there, where you don't have to actually simulate this again at all, or freeze the simulation. You can just dial up a morph that you've made yourself. So I've explained that earlier, and there'll be a timecode in the description at one point, like, you know, in about 24 hours, that'll show you where that is. Waiting for simulations to end. Oh, by the way, before I forget, while we're waiting for this to do this, I have this subway animation that you saw in the holding loop. I've rendered that in the cloud. That was a really exciting adventure for me. There are companies out there who have essentially VMs or computers that you can connect to, that you can rent by the hour, that have phenomenal GPU rig. So mine had 4 RTX 3080 cards in there. So that's kind of crazy. So 1,000 iteration frame inside the tunnel took 30 seconds on that rig, and that was amazing. So I could render 1,200 frames in literally 15 hours. That was very, very cool. I very much like that. And if you have animations, it's a wonderful way of working. So cloud rendering is a thing. It's absolutely a thing. All I needed to do was install DAZ Studio, load up my scene. DAZ Studio would recognize what items needed to be in that scene, so it went and installed them automatically. They were DAZ items. Anything else I could provide via OneDrive, Google Drive, Dropbox, that sort of thing, and make sure it's all set up, make sure it's all working in principle. Just let it rip, and then, you know, go to sleep. That was really good. Hey, I like the expression. I like the hair drape. I might just save this and then add a wind node to it and see how quickly it simulates. If it doesn't simulate that fast, I might just let this render and stop the stream, and then I can show you the result, much like I did last time, and then just, you know, post a link to a video there. I'll just say with hair, and then the next one is going to be with hair and wind. Let's do that. I don't want to blow her away. I'm thinking also for it to be a really nice looking wind animation. I think we're going to probably have to do something along the lines of, you know, 200 to 500 frames. Well, we'll see. We'll see. So let's say we do this for 61 frames to begin with. I'm on frame 0 right now. I'll go and create myself a new dForce wind node, apply the default settings. With the wind node selected, so I'm going to go and move this over here. And I think, Matthew, this was your question. What happens when you move the wind node further away? If I do it kind of to here, this is currently the endpoint of where the wind would influence anything. So if I run it now, we wouldn't see the wind influence anything. So I need to bring it into this, at least here. I also need to bring it up a little bit. And I'm thinking, because we want to simulate both the hair and the skirt, the whole diameter needs to be larger. And those are all animatable properties if you ever need to do that. So in my case, I need to increase the diameter to something like this. Might even put that up a little bit like so. So the whole figure, as well as the hair, is in this wind tunnel there. I might also not utilize this fall off region here. I'm going to bring this ring forward a little bit. So that's the fall off start. It just goes over here. So this ring moves over behind the figure. That means the fall off happens after the figure, but not in this wind tunnel here. I might do that. And we've already known this from before, that 5, the default of 5 miles per hour on the wind, that is probably not enough. So let me go and make this 20. And try, before I run this with the hair, let me go and freeze the hair. Under jam hair, I'll select the jam hair and go to simulation. I'm going to go and freeze the hair. So I don't want to re-simulate the hair at the moment. I just want to see how strong the wind is from this node. And let's go and see what happens. Over 60 frames. So this should now hopefully remember the hair and not do anything to the hair. So the hair is not going to waft, but hopefully the dress is. Oh, it is already. Look at that. 20 miles an hour is quite exciting. It's just a function. The wind node is just a function that is built into Dash Studio. So it's like creating a primitive. You can create yourself a dForce wind node. I think I also started from the memorized pose. I didn't mean to actually do that. I wanted to just go, let me just go and do that again. On here, start modes from memorized pose, I'm going to say actually on the character here. Switch that off and go try this again. So now she should just retain that pose and the wind should just waft her dress around. There's more about the wind node in the beginning of the stream. So once I've got the time codes there, you'll be able to go there straight away. And we hadn't tried this with an actual cloth item yet, but I would imagine it should just waft in the wind and it'll look really, really nice. It's so wafty. Well, that was the plan. I don't see it wafting all that much, but maybe it's still, maybe it's still coming. Maybe I'm a little bit impatient here. Exactly, it's under create. That's right. Trevor, good idea. Do you know, Ascania, that is a really good point. All this done with an additional add-on product that you have to buy. This is all built into Dash Studio and it's all available for free. That is absolutely correct. It's sometimes, I find that's really important to just know what the base application does. And then if you want to add additional functionality, then a product really comes in handy. But often I've found I bought products that essentially just used something that was already in Dash Studio, and then I paid money for it. And I was thinking, hang on a minute, that's not fair. I don't like that. Just in principle, does the dress waft? It does, but not actually as much as I had hoped. It certainly does waft. Maybe I'll go and make the dress is probably also I'll go switch off the hair first of all. Then the dress, let me go and switch off the subdivision surface modifier. That's just with base resolution. And then let's see what oh yeah, look at that. So that is actually that is windy. It's just not quite windy and elegant at the same time, is it? But it certainly is windy. And you can see that her sleeves are being blown back. Is it too windy, perhaps? Is 10 maybe enough? I'd love to see what this does to the hair. So it certainly is windy. I wonder if 10 might be a better way to do it, just to see what happens. Let's try it. Let's try 10 instead of 20. And that's a setting on the wind node. So the wind node parameters, they can be animated as well. You can find those with the wind node selected on the parameters tab under wind. So there's 20, and I just want to make sure if I move my playhead through it, yeah, it stays on 20. Earlier I had accidentally animated this value. I didn't want to do that here. Let's re-simulate that. Maybe 10 is actually enough. And the hair, since it is so much geometry, I don't want her to have that the German word for it is Föhnfrisur. I'm not entirely sure what the English word for that is. Lynn Welly might be familiar with that term, Föhnfrisur. Like in Harald Schmidt hat eine fürchterliche Föhnfrisur. Also possible to move the node. That I can do. Or I can either put it on an angle, or I can literally just move the node either from left to right, or I can just rotate it a little bit. That'll also make a difference. I just like to see what this looks like with the hair, and I'm hoping that we can at least do one simulation pass, so just that we can see the just to see the tendency. So I'm thinking maybe 10 is enough. And the jam hair, that's just got mesh smoothing, so that also has a high resolution applied. I'm going to go switch that to base res, so it'll look a little chunky, but it'll help the dForce simulation and my computer greatly. So let's try that out. See how the hair is now affected by the dForce wind. Oh, it's still frozen, isn't it? Duh. Abort! Jam hair is still frozen under simulation. Don't freeze. Go back. Try again. Be prepared to wait. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Absolutely. Look at that. That works very fast already. Oh, actually, no, sorry. It starts from the top, doesn't it? God, I'm getting too excited. Lyra, okay, interesting. Yes, I think experimentation is really the best thing you can do. So there's two links that I recommend you thoroughly read through. The first one is something that's pinned on the general DAZ Studio forums. Brian, see if you can find the link. It's on the Discord server as one that I have prepared. That is something that Rob prepared, and that's called dForce Start Here, I believe. And that it's a lengthy thread, no comments on it. And it's just a documentation of what dForce is, where to find parameters and all that. Basically all the stuff, some of the stuff that I've told you in the course of this video. So if you want to read up on that, that's a thread to read, dForce guide. And then the second one, and this is also born from experimentation, that's R.G. Cincy, Richard's guide of basically his documentations around dForce over the years. And those two guides, completely free, they're in the DAZ forums. Those are really cool. And there's tons of little experiments, so especially Richard R.G. Cincy, he explains a lot of stuff, how you can put a kite in the air, how you can make a balloon fly, and how you can do all kinds of things with dForce, and no additional products required. And just have fun with it and try to get through these exercises. Make sure it doesn't annoy you. That's one thing I always find very important. It mustn't annoy me. It is supposed to be fun, and see how you can apply it to your own projects. So I'm thinking the wind isn't quite strong enough, or it hasn't quite picked up on the hair yet. So I might go back to 20, see how that floats our boat, because I'd really like to waft the hair in the wind. I might have to put it to something like 50, so it should have really started already. With the flag, 20 I believe was enough. dForce wind node, wind, let's see. So we could try 50, see what that does. Clear the whole simulation and try again. See what 50 does. Enchanted April, it's my private Discord server. I have a Discord for supporters, for direct supporters, and my mod team and I use it also as a place to communicate in preparation for these streams. R.G. Cincy's massive thread on dForce, that's the one. Absolutely. Possibly. DG Seeker, that's a possibility. Reducing the density of the hair, that is a possibility. I don't really know what the hair settings are. I might investigate that after the stream, because this is one of those things that could take literally hours. But I will definitely let you know what I come up with, and hopefully find a render that literally has her hair just blowing and wafting. It's another little animation project. It's just a lot of tinkering and trialing and seeing how it works. So one of those things. My friends, I might call it a day here, and as I said, I will link to this video when I'm done. It's been a pleasure meeting you. I'm so sorry about the little internet hitch. I'll let this render and see what happens. It's been a pleasure and a privilege meeting you all. I hope we can do this again, well, definitely in another month or so. We're moving at one point, so I'm hoping that's not going to interrupt the streams all too much. We haven't found anything suitable yet, but keep your fingers crossed for me and Julia that hopefully the move is going to go well. And I will definitely be back. Have a look at those links I've given you and enjoy the Jada bundle. Have fun with dForce, and I hope I'll see you later. Guys, take care. Bye-bye.